Guys, Andy.
My security guy, Andy, found out that the shekel I bought was stolen. Now he's got some sort of update. I hate to think, what could the problem be now?
Not every visitor at Pawn Stars was looking to make an honest deal. Some came with stolen treasures, hoping to turn them into cash without anyone noticing. However, hidden cameras, observant eyes, and years of experience meant the truth often surfaced fast. From rare coins to flashy jewelry, these audacious theft attempts were caught on tape, revealing a side of pawn transactions most people never see. Who were these thieves? What did they try to sell? Join us as we dive into the stories of Pawn Stars thieves who were caught red-handed, a biblical coin, and the mystery seller.
Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
I have a coin I think you might be interested in.
What do you got here?
It's a shekel of Tyre, like from the Bible.
Yeah, we only buy American coins, man, so you'll have to take it somewhere else.
Hold on. Since when do we only start buying American coins?
Well, that was our rule.
When a potentially stolen ancient item showed up at the pawn shop, the alarm bells rang immediately. Thieves sometimes think they can slip artifacts past experts, but this time, the disguise of the mysterious seller who brought an ancient coin was quickly discovered. It was a rare shekel of Tyre, believed to date back to biblical times, and it carried a history as heavy as its silver content. The coin was brought in by a man named Ryan Payne from Austin, Indiana, who presented it as a valuable artifact. Initially, Chumley dismissed it, insisting the shop only dealt in American coins. But when Rick Harrison stepped in, the mood shifted. He immediately recognized that the coin wasn't an ordinary collectible. He then mentioned that the coin's origin and historical context needs to be carefully checked. Ryan explained the coin's age and hinted at a possible connection to the silver referenced in biblical texts. While the specific biblical link couldn't be verified, Rick acknowledged that Tyrian shekels were authentic ancient currency. Rick took a closer look, paying attention to the details that matter in ancient coins. However, there was a downside. The coin had been cleaned, and that posed a problem in the collecting world. Cleaning strips away the natural surface that helps preserve both value and credibility. But even with that issue, the coin still held solid worth. Negotiations followed, and Ryan aimed high, asking for $2,000. Rick pushed back, factoring in the cleaning and the uncertainty of resale. After going back and forth, they landed at $1,600, and the deal was closed. For a moment, it looked like a perfect transaction. Although it was an unusual item, nothing was out of the ordinary. However, things took a very interesting turn when Andy, the shop's head of security, stepped in with new information. Authorities had flagged the coin as potentially stolen and requested it be placed on hold. This move changed everything. In the pawn business, if an item is confirmed stolen, it doesn't matter how much was paid, it has to be returned. That meant Rick was now facing the possibility of losing the full $1,600. As the situation unfolded, more details came in. The original owner had already been compensated by his insurance company for the loss, which shifted the legal standing of the coin. With that cleared, the hold was lifted, and the shop was allowed to keep it. Still, one question remained. Was the coin actually real? Rick decided to settle that himself. He opened the protective casing and examined it more closely. The weight, the markings, and the strike all aligned with what one would expect from an authentic Tyrian shekel. In the end, the coin checked out. When Ryan was later questioned about the truth behind the coins on national television, he claimed he paid a couple $100 for a shekel coin and others which dated back a couple thousand years ago in Jerusalem. However, he said he had to sell it because he needed money, as the $1,600 he received was used to buy diapers and other items since he and his wife recently had a new baby. What began as a questionable walk-in turned into a confirmed piece of ancient currency. Despite the scare surrounding its origin, Rick walked away with a legitimate artifact. It wasn't without risk, but this time, the gamble paid off. And just when it seemed like the biggest risk, Another act of thievery happened, and it was something far more questionable. One-man submarine and the hidden owner.
But I guess the minimum I could take is 5.
All right, I got to admit, this is the first time anyone's brought a submarine to my shop. Where in the world did you get this?
A miniature submarine showing up at a pawn shop might sound like something ordinary, but this one came with a serious problem. The woman who brought the sub in had no legal claim to it, and the true owner eventually surfaced after seeing it on television. In 2011, a woman named Lynette came in to Rick, claiming she wanted to sell her one-man submarine. The moment she described it, Rick knew it wasn't going to be a simple inspection. This was a submarine, not something that could just be weighed on a scale or glanced at under a counterlight. Still, he agreed to go to her home to see it in person. When he arrived, the submarine was there, and it was surprisingly sleek, sitting in a driveway like some futuristic car someone had parked there. The woman further explained she had acquired it from a person who didn't want it anymore. The story seemed unreal, of course. Why wouldn't anyone want to keep a $100,000 miniature submarine in their garage? It sounded like an easy deal, but Rick knew better than to jump to conclusions. Items like this had hidden stories, sometimes with legal risks attached. He examined the craft carefully. The hatch was sealed tightly. The controls were intact, but there were obvious signs of wear, rust spots along the hull, and evidence that it had been in the water more than once. Eventually, negotiations began, and after a bit of back and forth, they settled on $3,000. The next step was the real challenge. Rick called in a submarine expert, a former engineer and naval technician who specialized in small, private submersibles. The expert arrived and took the sub apart, piece by piece, checking the pressure seals and the engine parts. "This is no toy," the expert said. "If someone wanted to make this fully operational and safe, we're talking roughly $100,000 in repairs and certification." Rick nodded. On the surface, it seemed like a bargain, but the real question was the origin. Submarines were not the kind of items you could legally sell without paperwork, and that's when the story took a twist. A few days later, the submarine appeared on an episode on Pawn Stars, and the actual owner of the submarine's lawyer saw it. It was then discovered that the submarine had actually been stolen 5 years prior from a wealthy individual in Rancho Mirage, California. Lawyers were quickly involved, and the situation escalated. Turns out, the woman who brought it in had no right to sell it. However, the Las Vegas police were contacted, and it was determined that Lynette did not seem to know the sub was stolen. Negotiations were tense. Rick had a buyer lined up, and the submarine's uniqueness made it desirable, but legal rights always take precedence. In the end, after reviewing ownership documents and confirming the original claim, the submarine was returned to its rightful owner. As a result, the pawn shop ended up with no submarine and no money. However, while a stolen submarine pushed things to the extreme, the next case proved something. Even smaller things stolen could raise just as many red flags. Who was the thief, and what did he come to sell? A Penn State ring with no identity.
3 Orange Bowl ring.
When did Joe Paterno start coaching? Like 1966?
Still coaching today.
He makes my grandfather seem young.
The moment the 1973 Penn State Orange Bowl ring hit the counter, Rick noticed something was wrong. The engraving that should have identified the original owner was gone. Without it, the ring couldn't be verified, and that immediately raised alarms. It could be stolen. The seller, Terry, a middle-aged man, explained he needed some extra cash. He was remodeling his house and hoped the ring could help cover expenses. According to him, he had purchased it decades ago from a former teammate, Jeff Clark, someone he had played alongside back in the day. Ordinarily, it sounded like a simple transaction. It was simply as though a former player passed along memorabilia. Nevertheless, Rick and Corey took the ring from him, holding it carefully. It was impressive, showing the heaviness, solid gold, with the unmistakable insignia of Penn State, and the detailing that marked it as an Orange Bowl championship ring. But as they inspected it more closely, something caught Rick's eye. The engraving, the one that usually identified someone as the original owner, had been removed. "That's a red flag," Rick said. He explained that championship rings are considered personal property. Removing identifying marks not only erases the ring's history, but can also make selling it illegal. It's the kind of thing pawn shops have to be extremely careful about, and they knew it. Without the engraving, there was no way to verify ownership. Was this an authentic ring from 1973? Probably. Could it have been stolen, altered, or misappropriated? That possibility was real, and it couldn't be ignored. However, the seller insisted on its authenticity. "I played with this guy back in the 70s, he said. "He didn't want it anymore, and he needed money, so I bought it from him." He seemed honest and talked about late-night practices and road trips for the bowl games. But the law doesn't work on trust alone. Pawn shops are bound by federal regulations that protect against handling stolen property. And any alteration to identification complicates things beyond what a verbal claim could resolve. Rick examined the ring under a jeweler's magnifier, checking every detail: the inlaid stones, the gold hallmarks, and the intricate designs that confirmed it was indeed a ring from that era. Corey researched the 1973 Penn State team roster and verified that the design matched the rings awarded that year. Everything pointed to authenticity, except for the missing engraving. "That engraving is the key," Rick explained. "Without it, we can't verify who it belongs to. It's like taking the license plate off a car. You just don't know where it came from." In the end, Rick had to make a hard decision. Despite the ring's beauty and historical significance, he declined to make an offer. The potential risk of handling stolen property was too high, and the absence of identifying marks left too many unanswered questions. Corey also agreed. They maintained that no matter how tempting the piece, pawn shops operate in a world where due diligence is everything. The seller left disappointed, but understood the matter at hand. He hadn't expected the ring to become a legal headache. He had thought it was just a collectible piece he could pass along. If a missing engraving could raise that much suspicion, the next case took deception even further. Because this time, it was about the entire item being fake. Who brought the fake item? The fake diamonds that nearly cost the shop.
In this business is back when CZs first came out. CZ is a cubic zirconium. Nobody knew about them, and they tested as diamonds.
Everything. Fraud hit the shop hard when a string of fake diamonds showed up, each one sold by someone trying to cash in. Sellers presented sparkling stones that looked like the real deal, but under scrutiny, they were exposed as cubic zirconia. At the beginning of the pawn shop, the owners, still learning the ropes, had almost fallen for the scam, losing thousands before realizing the truth. In the early days of the pawn shop, those shiny temptations almost derailed the business. Diamonds have always drawn attention, but not all that glitters is gold. In this case, it wasn't gold. It wasn't even real diamonds. The story began innocently enough. Sellers arrived at the shop with what they claimed were high-quality diamonds, and the owners, eager to grow their inventory, examined the stones. At the time, the shop was just growing, and they had not yet mastered the subtle art of distinguishing real diamonds from convincing imitations. Cubic zirconia, a synthetic gemstone almost indistinguishable to the untrained eye, became the perfect tool for deception. At first, everything seemed legitimate. The sellers told believable stories about how they acquired the gems, and the owners, trusting the authenticity, purchased them at prices they thought reflected their true market value. Each transaction felt like a win. However, the harsh reality emerged. The stones, when tested under proper conditions, were not diamonds at all. The revelation was crushing. Thousands of dollars had been spent on stones that were virtually worthless in the resale market. Estimates put the losses between $25,000 and $30,000, a staggering amount for a young business still finding its footing. In a History Channel segment in 2010, Rick Harrison discussed the time he was cheated by someone he didn't expect. A man in a sharp suit was looking to pawn a pair of diamond earrings. Rick asked all the right questions and made sure everything was checked. The seller also gave all the right answers and also showed him a receipt. Rick paid over $40,000 for it. However, 3 days later, the police showed up. The jewelry was stolen. The victim got her diamonds back, and the criminal paid the price. But Harrison was out his money. "That was the biggest bust I ever had in the pawn shop," he said. For the pawn shop owners, it was more of a wake-up call and a loud financial hit. They realized that in the world of rare gems, appearances can be deceiving, and trusting blindly can come at a steep cost. Every glimmer that caught the eye had to be questioned and verified. Determined not to be fooled again, the shop owners invested time in learning the science behind gemstones. They studied how real diamonds refract light, how their hardness compares to synthetic stones, and how to test them under magnification. They consulted experts, attended seminars, and implemented new procedures in the shop to ensure each stone's authenticity before making a purchase. Gem testers and specialized magnifying loupes became standard tools in their arsenal. This early misstep, painful as it was, became an invaluable lesson. Not only did it save them from similar scams in the future, but it also shaped the shop's reputation. While the pawn shop now thrives on buying and selling with confidence and avoiding the pitfalls that once nearly cost them everything, the next case posed another bigger risk. The question stands: who did it truly belong to, and did anyone have the right to sell it at all? A tortoise-shell guitar and the legal risk.
This guitar here, and I wasn't sure whether or not I could legally sell it.
It's a tortoiseshell.
One afternoon, Rick got a call from a customer named John. He came carrying something unusual, a guitar unlike any he had seen before. The body and neck were crafted from tortoiseshell, a material once prized for its striking patterns and glossy finish, but now a source of serious legal concern. The customer, unsure of the guitar's history or whether it could be sold, explained he had purchased it from another pawn shop years earlier and now wanted to see if Rick would buy it. Rick's interest was piqued immediately. Tortoiseshell has always carried a mystique among collectors, particularly for instruments made before the strict bans on trade were implemented. He knew, however, that trade in tortoiseshells had been prohibited in the early 1970s. This was from an agreement under the Endangered Species Act and international agreements such as CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. These bodies were established to strictly regulate the sale of items made from endangered species. The last thing any reputable pawn shop could risk was involvement in illegal commerce, no matter how beautiful or valuable the object appeared. Before making any offers, Rick decided to dig deeper. He examined the guitar carefully, noting the detailed inlays and the subtle variations in the shell's color. The craftsmanship suggested it could indeed be decades old, but verifying the guitar's age and provenance was critical. Without confirmation, buying it could open the shop to serious legal trouble, including fines and potential criminal liability. To get clarity, Rick consulted a trusted expert in vintage musical instruments and tortoise-shell antiques, Jesse Amoroso. The expert confirmed that guitars made of tortoiseshell, especially those constructed before the ban, could fetch thousands of dollars due to their rarity and craftsmanship. Amoroso also pointed out that the instrument was clearly made with a sea turtle shell, which requires the death of the animal to obtain the shell. Instruments from the 1960s or earlier, if intact and playable, were highly sought after by collectors and musicians alike. However, the expert emphasized that the legality of selling such an instrument depended entirely on its documented age and origin. Any item made after the 1970s or lacking proper proof of age could not legally change hands under U.S. or international law. Rick realized he faced a dilemma. The guitar could be extremely valuable, but the risk of purchasing an illegal item outweighed the potential reward. Even with the seller insisting it was acquired legally from a previous pawn shop, the documentation was incomplete. There were no receipts, certifications, or proof showing the guitar predated the 1970 ban. Without those records, Selling the guitar could land the shop in legal jeopardy. Ultimately, Rick made a cautious decision. Despite the instrument's beauty and potential market value, he declined to purchase it. For a pawn shop, reputation and compliance with the law are non-negotiable. Even the slightest risk of breaking wildlife protection regulations could result in fines or permanent damage to the shop's credibility. In this case, the pawn shop's safety was prioritized over the potential gain, and the guitar remained with the customer. Do you think some of these thieves really thought their stolen or fake treasures would go unnoticed? If you found a stolen item in a pawn shop, would you return it or risk keeping it for the payoff? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.